Good morning, members. We formed a quorum, so I will call the meeting to order. Staff, please invite the administration to join us. This is a special meeting of the panel on food safety and environmental hygiene. We will mainly be talking about the proposed changes to the regulation on metallic contamination in food. We'll be receiving deputations. Public officers are now joining us and would like to welcome Dr. Ho. I would like to congratulate Dr. Ho. This is the first day after having been promoted as the controller of the Center for Food Safety. He is accompanied by Mr. Kenneth Chen, PAS for Food and Health. Altogether, 8 individuals or representatives of organizations have indicated they wish to attend. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Submissions received have already been referred to the administration for their reference. I would follow the order of the names on the list to invite deputations to speak. You each get 3 minutes, and the timer will be activated when your time limit is reached. Please try to wrap up your speech as soon as possible. For those who haven't submitted a written copy of your submission, please do so after the meeting. Please be reminded that if you would like to put on the earpiece, channel 0 for floor, 1 for Cantonese, 2 for English, and 3 for Cantonese. Please speak into the microphone so as to facilitate interpreters. Please also note that when you speak, you are not covered by the protection and immunity provided under the Legislative Council Powers and Privileges Ordinance. This applies to your written submissions as well, that is not protected by the Powers and Privileges Ordinance. Please also note that you need to abide by our security measures. So please pay attention to the requirements in that note. We would like to keep the proceeding orderly. I will give the floor to the deputations, and then I will invite the administration to give a reply, and then members who are present may ask questions. First of all, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Wu Chek-him from the DAB. Thank you. I'm the Deputy Spokesman for Food Safety and Environmental Hygiene of the DAB. First of all, in relation to the proposed amendments to Regulation 132V, we have a broad support. Well, in fact, the administration hasn't been amending the regulations for a long period of time. Now, 30 years have passed, and I understand the government would like to enhance the safeguard of public health. This is good. However, I think we need to strike a balance between safeguarding public health and over-regulation. If we do not see any significant impact on public health and we still try to over-regulate and follow blindly the international requirements, then I'm afraid this is going to affect the food supply in Hong Kong. It will also reduce the food choices. This is also not in line with the as low as reasonably achievable principle of Codex. Therefore, I believe that the administration should look at the data from other Asian cities and revisit the proposed limits. You have to make sure that whether we have the testing ability and whether this is in line with the physical health of the people of Hong Kong. The administration has said that for individual food and food groups, understand that 5% is a threshold, but then I'm afraid if the limit is exceeded, it will affect the food trade, and then the manufacturer would also decide to stop supplying the food to Hong Kong. Therefore, I think the administration should make sure that we understand what will happen when it comes to the implementation of the regulation. We don't want to deal a great blow to the relevant trades. At the same time, we would like to say that the administration must provide adequate support to the trade. Make sure that you help them to reach the new standard. The administration should also publicize the message and carry out public education. Otherwise, there will be an impact on our society. Thank you, Madam Chair. Next, Mr. Chen Chiu Kang from the Hong Kong Fishermen Consortium. Well, our seafood is very popular with our tourists. Hong Kong is known for its fine food. Seafood is indeed something that attracts many visitors to come to Hong Kong and enjoy the seafood. To me, for food safety, it is something that we need to pay attention to. Even for fishermen, of course, would uphold the principle of food safety. However, Madam Chair, I understand that the government is going to tighten the metallic limits in seafood. I think the administration hasn't been clear in explaining the substance to us. When we do not know adequately, then the trade will be worried. There will even be a panic. This is because we're not sure to what extent the limits will be tightened. And what about the existing situation in the food industry, in particular seafood? Have we exceeded the limits or are we fine? We don't know. I think the administration should have given us a detailed explanation and should have consulted us. So for us, the fishermen, we don't know which seafood is good and which is not compliant. So we know nothing, and indeed it is worrying. So we're afraid that perhaps for the catch that we get, some of the fish may exceed the maximum levels. Does it mean that the entire catch should be seized? Not to mention the live fish. Even for chilled fish, if they are sort of withheld for a day or two, they will perish. And so I think that the administration should have given us more information. Otherwise, we're worried. And in fact, it is not a matter that we don't want to support the proposal. Even if you want to secure our support, you need to explain more to us. We don't want to have the entirety of our catch being regarded as exceeding the limits. Now, I think you know that we have to understand what to do with the non-compliant catch. The administration hasn't told me what to do. Will the entire catch be seized? Madam Chair, yes, I want to support the administration, but the administration should have carried out a more extensive consultation exercise. Thank you. Next, Hong Kong Fishermen's Association, Mr. Yang Shengchen. Thank you. For us in the egg and fish sector, we like to provide quality food to the citizens of Hong Kong. But then the trade is worried because we're afraid that our production methods may not be able to tie in with the new requirements. As far as the fisheries industry is concerned, in particular capture fisheries, as to whether our product can meet the requirements, it depends on a number of factors. Say, for example, whether the administration has been monitoring the water quality adequately. For the mariculturists, it also depends on the method of production used, and there are also other objective factors. And we also source the seafood from other places for sale or for processing. I want to know if the administration can provide support, to us, so that we won't be exceeding the limits. I think the administration should look at that, and then upon amendment, I think the administration should do something about it. Say, for example, providing adequate time for us, and there should be adequate support. I think the industry also look forward to this. That is, there should be extensive public education and publicity for both the trade, the stakeholders, as well as the community at large, so that we can understand the details of the proposed regulation, and then we won't need to be worried.
And the current maximum level proposed by the administration have been in line with international standards, and those proposed by the Codex. And however, to avoid blindly following these MLs, I hope the administration could explain whether the proposed ML are suitable to local circumstances, and to consider the trade situation, just to avoid reducing choices by the public. And next is the Hong Kong Fisheries Development Association, Mr. Choi King Hang. I hope with the intention of the amendments being very good. However, there's still some unclarity in the consultation document that would cause query in the trade, and some of the amendments might have caused some of the fish products to not meet the criteria. So we have the following opinions. And now that some of the metallic contaminant levels on fish products will be tightened. And from our understanding, the administration, to ensure the local security for this food and exceeding certain maximum levels will be stay below the 5%. However, the trade would think that the below 5% could be over 5% or less than 0.1. And if a particular food had over 5% have exceeded the levels, are not able to supply it to Hong Kong, and we think that undeniably that would seriously affect the supply, and help the government explain clearly that in the event of the food cycle disrupted, how would it handle it, just would not reduce choices of the public. And from the consultation, we would like to set an example that notice that the highest maximum levels for fish at 4.8 reduced to 0.1. However, the fish encompasses a wide spectrum. However, we're not able to rule out a particular food or a food group. I would like individuals such as some sort of group under the new amendments that would exceed 5%. Or even up to 100%, that you cannot rule that out. If the government were not able to explain adequately and lay out the justification, besides there are a concern from the trade that will have an impact, such as, for example, certain food goods were missing in Hong Kong. And finally, I hope that the administration should be very careful to explain. This consultation may mislead in some way, which the public may think. That some existing would not be unsafe, but because they would not meet the proposed new standards, whether they are safe for consumption currently, and hope that there will be support to provide to the trade to offer more publicity, provide to safeguard public health, as to minimize the impact to the public and the trade. Thank you, Chairman. Next, see the Democratic Party, Mr. Liu Chiu. And the Democratic Party has the following views on the amendments, and since the relevant standard had not been updated over 30 years and rather backward, for example, the lead is still at less than 6 milligram per kilogram. So the Democratic Party is quite welcoming for such amendments. However, we have reservations about relaxing certain standards. I think that being stringent should be the general directions. For example, the chromium levels have been tightened, and however, the rice supplies have not led to a shortfall of rice supplies, and the administration failed to lay a scientific basis and relaxed from 0.1 milligram to 0.2 milligrams. And some of the food that have been banned in the past will be allowed to be imported to Hong Kong, and this should not put trade above the public health, and hope that the government should continue to adopt the standard of 0.1 milligram per kilogram. And concerning the mercury levels at fish, the mercury level comes in various forms. However, the government will only wish to a relatively highly toxic methyl mercury instead of the total mercury levels. The Democratic Party don't think this is a satisfactory proposal, and hope that the administration to explain the scientific basis for this, and hope that the administration would also keep a holistic handling of the metal levels. For example, the administration have failed to amend the Chinese herbal medicine contamination level, and basically currently the standard is set at the daily dosage. The Chinese herbalist medicine and should be used for the individual ingredients instead of the entire dosage. In this should simultaneously amend this measures to have a comprehensive safeguarding public health. The next one is the Hong Kong Rice Association, Ms. Lam Po Chen. I'm representing the Hong Kong Rice Merchant Association Hong Kong Limited, the Hong Kong Rice Import-Export Association, and Hong Kong Rice Supply Association Limited. And concerning the excessive chromium level on chrome-rich rice, the current state is at 0.1 milligram. The proposal attempts to raise to 0.2 milligrams. As we all know, in most of the countries, the chromium levels is set at 0.2 to 0.4 milligrams. The chromium levels of 0.1 and only exists in Hong Kong, and the Codex had established the maximum levels for chromium at cadmium over 0.5 milligrams. For example, Japan has set the standard at 0.4 milligrams, and now the government not adopt Codex suggestion is to consider the actual circumstances in Hong Kong, and putting safeguarding public in the front and setting up 0.2 milligrams. This standard the trade would already accept, and the 0.2 standard has actually been more than half of the 0.4 standards. And currently in European Union, Korea, China, and Singapore, the cadmium levels is set at 0.2 per milligram. I think that we should align with other countries and to relaxing the standards from 0.1 milligram to 0.2 milligram. Hong Kong foodstuff rely on foreign export. About 99% of the rice will be imported from elsewhere. It will continue to adopt the 0.1 milligram as a standard. A lot of rice from other countries may not meet the Hong Kong's standards, which would reduce the choices for Hong Kong. The 0.1 milligram standard has been established for over 30 years, and the soil conditions, environment, climate, and the fertilizers efficiency has gone leaps and bounds in these times. I hope that would you consider the actual realities and to move on with the times and to dovetail with the international developments. Trade would recognize and accept these amendments. The next deputation is from Hong Kong Food Council, Vice Chairman Dr. Wong Pak Yun. And the honorable members, the Hong Kong Food Council, established in 1984, is an independent and non-profit organization. And the council is formed by major food organizations and enterprise members, covering many food industries, including rice, sugars, oils, condiments, preserved fruits, sugar, candies, fruit, vegetables, flour, canned tea, wines, and beverage services. The Food Council expressed support for the proposed amendments to Food Adulteration, Metallic Contamination regulations. However, the Council would think that at the same time of safeguarding public health, we need to consider the impact of the amendments to the trade and its practicality, and to strike a balance between the two. The Food Council agreed that the past amendments in setting maximum levels on liquid and solid would be in line with international practice. However, the Food Council hoped that the government, in setting the maximum levels of individual foods, should take reference, should tie with international standards and take reference from the general standards of country instead of the highest levels. And over 95% of food in Hong Kong were imported. As to avoid overkill and establish standard that was way much higher than the European and countries. The consultation document showed that in the past few years, food samples that have been tested for excessive metallic levels have been very, very small in number. That proved that the trade has been exercised great amount of self-discipline, and the immediate risk to Hong Kong is quite low. On the other hand, the new amendments will add additional testing and cost burden to the food industry. The Food Council will help the government should set up a grace period before the implementation of the amendments and giving the industry more time to adapt to that to reduce the impact of the amendments. Thank you. And the last deputation is from the Hong Kong Chamber of Seafood Merchants Limited, Mr. Ling Man Sham. Chairman, the Chambers is formed by a group of seafood wholesalers. We agreed in most of the contents of the amendments. I think this direction and the classification method would better safeguard public health and easier for the trade to implement. I personally think that the trade would be very concerned which seafood species will be affected under the new system. As we all know, seafood would often have price fluctuation due to supply and demand. As such, the new testing method would lead to the shortfall of certain seafood products that would add to the price volatility that led to a radical impact to the food and beverage industry and the public. However, the seafood trade must put Hong Kong's public's health first. However, the industry would able to know which of the high risk destination of seafood they would able to import those fishes from elsewhere as for supplements. However, seafood trade is not able to change the source, the import source like other trades, because catching and aquafarming takes time. In 2012, these Shenzhen had recorded excessive level of cadmium. About 69 shell samples account to be failing to test about scallop, dry scallops, oysters, Venice clams, and various clams. And importing from China took up a very high proportion of seafood into Hong Kong. Thus, which source in China considered safe in past testing is concerned of the trade. And for the fish, according to the consultation document, only tuna is to be widely eaten in Hong Kong, such as like sharks, swordfish, fish, and king mackerel are not popular, and thus the impact would be quite minuscule. The consultation suggested tuna would adopt the highest standard of 0.5 milligram per kilogram. This standard will be higher than the American standard of 1 milligram. And from my limited understanding, the tuna have a wide activity range. It was very difficult to track this area, and the smaller one could catch near shore, even though we're able to trace the source and have a lower risk of mercury, methyl mercury. However, the larger size mercury were using by ocean fish catching vessel to be caught and exported to Japan. And so even claim that it's catch in Japan, it actually come from elsewhere. Thus, if any problem with the tuna fish, the trade would not be to import and tuna from elsewhere. Thus, I hope that the administration could consider relaxing certain standards and giving time for the industry to adapt. Thank you. And thank for deputations arriving at the LegCo to express their views. And next, we have the administration to offer preliminary response, and members could signal if they like to speak by show of hands. I heard Mr. Shukafa would like to speak, and anyone who would like to speak can put up their hand. And the administration representatives are from the FVHD, Center for Food Safety, Controller Dr. Ho Yok-yen to respond. And earlier that Dr. Tam Lai-fan, the predecessor, had retired, and we welcome Dr. Ho to take over the post. And Dr. Ho to respond. And I heard the deputations heard, and there are concerns on the cadmium levels in rice, and there are also some concerns on Chinese herbal medicine and fishes and so on. I hope Dr. Ho can respond to that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank the deputations from different organizations and political parties to comment on the proposals. We are having a 3-month consultation period. We'll communicate with the community, we'll communicate with the trade. We'd like to get more input from you so as to make sure that the proposed regulations can meet our objectives. The consultation will last until September. On this occasion, we'd like to amend the regulations for 3 purposes. First of all, enhancing our safeguarding of public health. Second, will be aligning our requirements with the international standards so as to reduce the compliance cost. Thirdly, after all, we are talking about internationally traded products, and we want to facilitate the alignment of Hong Kong standards with the international standards. We spent a few years on reviewing the regulation. We took into account a number of factors. First of all, the latest standards from Codex concerning metallic contamination. You know that it is ubiquitous, and for food to contain metallic contaminants, it is unavoidable. However, what can we do to reduce the exposure? I'm sure we need to strike a balance. We want to be applying the principle of as low as reasonably achievable. On the other hand, we don't want to jeopardize the supply of food. Therefore, when we drew up the proposals, we've made reference to the requirements in other jurisdictions. In order to safeguard public health, we need to look at our local food consumption pattern and dietary practice. We've carried out a lot of risk assessments so as to check whether we have been providing adequate safeguards for public health in relation to our proposed amendments. Now, when compared with what we have been getting for the past 30 years, it is a major change. Instead of 7 metals, we're covering 14 metals. And then we are getting 145 maximum levels instead of just 19. Some of the deputations have said that our regulatory regime targeted at food in solid and liquid form, or all types of food, and this is out of step with the international standards. The Codex has said that if we have a very general limit in relation to food in liquid or solid form, then this is not in line with the regulatory need, and it is not in line with a proper compliance cost. Generally speaking, it will be too lenient. If you've only got one limit, you can only err on the sort of relaxed side. Now we are more targeted in relation to our regulatory approach. We need to tighten the limits for certain foods when there is a need to do so. Now, if we cover food in solid or liquid forms, it means that we are following the approach of countries which haven't updated their requirements. Now we are getting 145 ml instead of 19. In other words, we are tightening up the requirements across the board, and it means that it is going to help with the protection of public health. 90 of them are more stringent than existing requirements, and for those that are less stringent than the existing requirements, the relaxation has been fully justified, and the relaxation hasn't jeopardized our public health protection objective. Therefore, protection of public health has been given first priority. We won't be doing anything for the sake of trade, but at the expense of public health. Our proposed MLs have all been scientifically justified. It has been backed up by some objective analysis and on the basis of local data, so that between protection of public health and over-regulation, avoiding undue regulation, we would like to achieve a balance. Please also note that after all, we are talking about commodities, and as a member of the World Trade Organization, we need to pay attention to the WTO requirements. For the WTO, it has taken on board the Codex standards, and if we adopt the Codex standards, that means that we should be safe from trade disputes. If we are tighter than Codex requirements, we must be justified in our tighter requirements, and you should be backed by scientific data. Of course, if we are less stringent than Codex requirements, it is up to individual members to make such a decision, and there's no need for us to justify our case. We have listened to the views of the public, we have listened to the views of the trade, and if you say that we should tighten up a particular maximum limit, you need to justify your proposal before we can consider whether to take it up or not. Madam Chair, would you like me to give specific replies on safe rice? Yes, please address the questions raised by the deputations. First of all, the impact on the food trade. We know that by tightening up the requirements, there will certainly be an impact on the food trade, because it will be a tightening up across the board. As to how to achieve this, well, I think the Codex has already said that we need to lower the level of contamination as much as possible. But while we want to achieve that target, while at the same time we don't want to have undue regulation, we have adopted the figure of 5% as the percentage of unsatisfactory samples. We have looked at our previous survey data. We have also looked at some benchmark findings. So I think the food trade doesn't have to worry too much. Indeed, there will be an impact, but then we believe that the impact will be no more than 5%. In the coming months, we are going to communicate with the trade. We do have data. We know about the sources of origin. We know which sources will have a higher rate of unsatisfactory samples. Once we have come up with the new requirements, we are going to call technical meetings at which we will provide support to the trade, so that the trade would know what to do before they can meet our requirements. So we'll certainly have a dialogue with the trade. As to the implementation, that is whether one fish found to be in exceedance with the limits will cause the entire catch of the vessel be seized. I'm sure you'll have more than one fish on board and you won't have the entire catch to be sort of affected. But then fish of the same kind of fish will be affected, I suspect. Probably more citizens are concerned about the case of cadmium in polished rice. Perhaps I can share with you our findings arising from our analysis and studies. First of all, cadmium. In the past, we have carried out a total diet study. The purpose is to find out about the food patterns of Hong Kong citizens, and we try to look at the exposure to cadmium. Our finding is that, generally speaking, and in fact there are certain reference values, the reference values from the World Health Organization. We understand that the general population has 30% as the reference value for the exposure. So you will not be affected, your health won't be affected if you don't exceed the 30% reference value. For others who are high-level consumers, I think the general population won't have much a lot of impact on their health. For cadmium, I don't think it is a big problem. But when it comes to rice, in the past few years, we've been monitoring the rice supply in Hong Kong. From 2012 up to now, we examined over 400 samples, out of which only 4 exceeded the existing limit of 0.1 mg. For the 4 samples, 2 from Japan, 1 from Thailand, and 1 from the mainland China. For the 4 unsatisfactory samples, there was only 1, and that's from China, that exceeded 0.2 mg, which is our proposed limit. For the majority of the rice samples, that is 64% of them, fell below our limit for detection. And in fact, it has been pitched at a very, very low level, that is 0.02%. In other words, most of the rice that we consume shouldn't cause any worry at all. Since only 4 samples were non-compliant, so the satisfactory rate has been more than 99%. And then for cadmium, of course, we're going to change the ml. For other metals, again, we are going to regulate the maximum levels, and we have been tightening up the levels across the board, like lead, mercury, and also arsenic. So for cadmium, perhaps some of you may worry that you are getting poorer quality rice as a result of relaxing the requirement concerning the cadmium ml. But then you need to abide by the mls for other metals like arsenic, cadmium, lead, etc. I will stop here. Mr. Chiu Kao-fai, Mr. Leung Yu-chong, Mr. Stephen Ho, Dr. Lo Wai-kwok, myself, as well as Dr. Pierre Chen would like to ask questions. Who else would like to ask questions? If not, then I will say that for this round, each of us will have 5 minutes for both the question as well as the answer. Later on, if we have time left and if other members would like to ask questions, I will accommodate. Mr. Chiu, first of all, congratulations, Dr. Ho. I just want to say that for Dr. Tam, your predecessor, she had close sort of communication with the trade. Whenever a new policy is proposed, she has been talking to us. So Dr. Ho, please keep it up and not just confined to this particular proposal. Do speak to the various sectors in the trade. Now, you want to enhance food safety for the sake of public health. Of course, it is something good. As I have said in the past, if you are over-regulating, if the limits are set too harshly, it won't be acceptable to the trade. In particular, as has been mentioned, if we simply follow the requirements of the WHO, in fact, not every country has been following closely. I have been talking to Professor Sophie Chen, who has now become the secretary. We have found that we haven't been following the requirements in each and every case. Now, Dr. Ho, let me turn to the question of polished rice. I think the trade representatives have already said that now we used to have 0.1 mg per kg for the limit. It is a very stringent requirement. For the past few decades, for metal contamination, I think it is only going to get worse instead of getting better. Now, for Japan, their limit is 0.4 mg. Now, on this occasion, you say that it should be 0.2 mg. I think it is acceptable to the trade, and I hope that you will pay attention to this. In fact, 0.1 mg is quite unacceptable. Now, for fish, just now someone has said that for tuna, it is said that as far as the mercury limit is concerned, it can be 0.5 mg. In the US is 0. It is 1. So what do you say about that, Dr. Ho?
Yeah. Mr. Xu, to respond to this, and on the mercury situation, the consultation paper had explained that our current standard is already quite stringent. However, that was not in alignment with Codex. And looking at the Hong Kong Total Diet Study, and about 11% of women of childbearing age and had the dietary exposure to mercury is quite serious. And what we're quite concerned is that for the methylmercury toxicity would affect fetus development, especially the brain. We shall relax the existing standard just to in line with Codex that we expect to have a further impact. However, the Codex actually have two standards. One of them is for general fishes of all fishes, and 0.5, and for the predatory fishes, because they will have bioaccumulation, the mercury will be acquired through consuming bigger fish, consuming smaller fishes. Thus, their methylmercury levels will be higher. Thus, we accept the standard of 1 milligram. And looking at a big underlying principle, first we have to dovetail with international standards. So where we have a bit different with Codex, even though we have shared the same values, however, we're using the total mercury levels, and the Codex we're using methylmercury, which is the most toxic. And thus, we would suggest that we should be in line with their standard first, because it's the international standards. But after alignment, if we let's say for predatory fishes include tuna, if we also get in line with on that, we will worry about the impact on the childbearing age women. And let me just elaborate more on tuna. I'm so sorry, we ran out of time. So simply put, let's say the American standards. And why do we accept 1 milligram? Why can't we Hong Kong accept this? So the administration think about it. And Food Council, Dr. Wang, on the grace period, and because traditional, a lot of food had been preserved, and which would take time to ferment. and after. And if the food will be imported for the implementation, so if we're offering grace period and extending it to let the trade know so they can work with time, and so their food product would meet the requirements. Mr. Leong. Thank you, Chairman. And in terms of the regulating metallic contaminants in the food, and from the public point of view, that of course we'll support the tightening standard because due to the health impact. However, the administration mentioned that we need to be in line with international practices. So in some situation we could not go against the international trend. However, the standard we have been adopted for quite a long time, they've been generally accepted. And for those that would not have major impact to our food supply, why do we need to relax it? Let's say on the issue, take the rice example. For the cadmiums, it has to have a serious impact because it would cause lung cancer. And and it's also been quite easy privilege. For example, the paints, tires. That could be easily absorbed into soil in farming. Thus, it could enter the food chain easily. And now they're using a relaxed standard from 0.1 with 0.2. So where is this necessity besides tying in with the national standards? However, in the past few decades, the supplier have no problem in complying that, and it don't seems to binary our choices. So why are we relaxing the standards? Dr. Ho, cadmium rice. Thank you, Mr. Leong. Thank you, Chairman. And if we comply with WHO standard, if we do not adopt the Codex standards, we would have to lay out our scientific justification why we're not accepting is that instead of adopting a more stringent standards. And the data that I provide, and if we use the 0.4 standards, and instead of 0.4, we can give good reasons for this, and able to tie in with the trade partners' requirements, and we do not accept this, and keep the 0.1 standards. We would have problems with it. In terms of we do not have sufficient adequate scientific justifications, and our trade partners, Dr. Ho, in the past 50 years, we'll be using 0.1. So why was 0.1 set 30 years ago? When we set the standards back then, we took reference from with other countries and also the standards of Codex back then. And the Codex, this standard was not used by Codex because and this current standard was only adopted 10 years ago by Codex. And do we have to make any amendments today? We shall be adopting today's standards to evaluate whether we have sufficient justification. If we keep the existing standards, just like Mr. Ling said, why do we need to explain that? We haven't changing anything. The World Trade Organization require that if we adopting a standard stricter than Codex, that we shall need to explain. So have we explained in the past 30 years? They wouldn't care that whether the standard was existing or newly established, because we have to explain. So we have to explain why do we not using 0.4 and use 0.2 or 0.1 instead. And I had explained earlier that if we use 0.2, we think that we have sufficient data to justify that, and actually tie in with our trade partners. And if we use 0.1, we lead to litigation. And currently, our existing 0.1 levels, we haven't received complaint in the past to think that our standards. Where did this complaints come from? I need to go back to check. This is mostly from the trade, or wholesalers or retailers. So can we provide it with the list of the complainants? And Dr. Ho and Hussein mentioned that the 0.1 would establish 0.1 ago, so that was made according to the standard from Codex back then. So, what's the criteria have led to the establishment of 0.1? I'm sure there's a scientific basis for that. So now that we have a scientific justification, why do we overriding that? And when the standard we said that they does not target it at rice, it's more actually targeted against cereals. And for the rice level, rice MLs were only established 10 years ago by Codex. Before that, there was no standards for that. So that is the development rather recently. So it's from major food groups, and we gradually narrowed down to a specific different food. I think other members have questions to follow. Mr. Ho. So can Mr. Chung please sit down first? You're blocking Mr. Ho. Oh, he has a rather large size. The tall guy is blocked by the fat guy. I can offer support for the direction of this consultation document, and this mentioned a lot of details remain unclear with no further deputations. And Mr. Xu had raised a lot of voice, for example, rice or other aspects. The administration have not followed Codex standards. We know some relaxation and some tightening. And for the rice, we are proposing a standard strictest from Codex standard, maybe because rice is considered a staple in Asia. I agree that a high standard should be adopted. It's like you said for tuna, example, that using a high sample because that it will affect fetal development in women, and your subtext would be the Western woman would not need to give babies, so that we don't understand the logic. I hope that you can elaborate on that. And on the implementation of certain new standards, from regulating 7 to 14 types of metals, and lots of the fishermen that I mentioned reflect to me that they don't even know how to pronounce the names of the metals. So within 3 months, you're asking to provide an effective constructive opinion. That would be rather impractical because they don't know what to say. Thus, I hope during this consultation exercise of the administration could go down to the local level to explain your direction about what we plan to do of these 7 metals that we plan to regulate, to explain them in detail. And all of a sudden, and if there's no opinion offered, and then come to the LegCo, and or come to amendment at the food channel, and all the opinions, and there will be very small room for amendments. And some fishermen organizations mentioned as like say, for certain food groups that if the supply would not be affect more than 5%, would take that acceptable. However, I've been chasing administration that let's say for specific groups, let's say fish for example, what kind of fish does have no idea. So how do you take the samples? So maybe you could just buy them on the street. However, if we're asking some very specific examples, let's say for the catch, let's say the red fishes maybe about half the supply over the limit. Does that mean Hong Kong should stop consuming the red fishes? And if such situation happen again, how would the administration offer support? So that would be quite concerned about, because some of the fishermen are specialized in catching certain fish species, let's say squid. And if we all of a sudden tell them there are problem with squid, and the whole fishing vessels would be at risk. So, Dr. Ho? Thank you for Dr. Ho's question. We would collate the relevant statistics and would communicate with the trade. And for the tunas, tuna is actually a rather big category. And they have a big tuna and small tuna types. And the tuna generally consumed by the Hong Kong usually of a smaller size for the sandwiches and cans. And these smaller species, their mercury levels will not be up to particularly high. And to satisfy the proposed 0.5 milligrams should not have an issue. And usually they have problem with a predatory, for example, bluefin tuna. That would have a situation more serious. And for the 7 metallic contaminants that have been added to become 14, and during consultation we will communicate clearly with the public. And the new metallic contaminants included is mainly targeted on bottled water and mineral water. And for the other general kinds of food, there will be no new standards. They will continue to be monitored by the 7 existing metals.
I think the administration must answer the question concerning specific fish. What about the golden thread fin bream? Are we going to be denied of their choice once you have kicked in the regulations? Are you going to give us the information within the 3-month consultation? Should be fine. Please go to the districts to consult the people. Dr. Lo Kwok. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm grateful to the deputations for attending today's meeting. In principle, as far as food safety is concerned, I think indeed when it comes to regulation, we should better be aligned with the international standards. We do have some local food supply, but to a very large extent, our needs are being met by the food coming from different quarters of the world. So if we don't align with the international standards, the sources of our food will be affected. But of course, if there is a need to tighten up the requirement concerning specific food items, I'm sure you need to carry out a very detailed study in the first place. Madam Chair, it isn't that we allow the citizens to consume unsafe food, but in the course of it, make sure that we follow the international practice. Now, today we've got the deputations here, so I would channel the questions to the tray. I think the deputations here are closely related to the livelihood of the people. We want to provide adequate choices to our citizens, and food safety is indeed important. So I just wonder if any of the deputations can explain the following point. I know you have been doing your best to meet the requirements. What about the testing capability in Hong Kong? Have you encountered any specific difficulties which you wish to bring up today? Yes, anybody from the deputations wishing to answer Dr. Lo Kwok's question? Dr. Wong, I'm from the Food Council. If I have a dish with vegetable and something else, how are you going to judge? And what about fruit? If it's been dried or hydrated, so how are you going to judge the heavy metal content? Perhaps it's a question for the administration. The raw material, or if you have garoupa with vegetables, do you also pay attention to the quantity of garoupa used in the dish? Dr. Ho, Well, we are talking about food or food groups. And then in most cases, we talk about the raw materials, the raw ingredients. That is before they are cooked. Yes, Madam Chair. Upon the enactment of the amendments, we will be taking samples of the food products in their raw form. If the raw food is compliant, there wouldn't be a problem when it has been processed. Unless we receive a complaint, we don't usually survey or take action on processed food. It is more complicated. We need to look at the ingredients, the composition, and we have to carry out certain conversion. Now, for some food products, if they have been concentrated, dried, or hydrated, we need to follow the international practice. That is, we need to convert the figures. We have to have some conversion and find out what it was like when it was still in the form of an agricultural product. So generally speaking, we won't be going to the restaurant, get a dish and try to test it. Say, for example, it's not that we'll be getting hold of a plate of garoupa and have it tested. So, in other words, for the case of cadmium in rice, we'll just take the grains instead of testing cooked rice. Correct. Madam Chair, what about the capability of our testing and laboratory sector? Dr. Ho. Thank you, Dr. Low. We have already talked to the laboratories in the private sector. For our proposed amendments, we do have some additional requirements. In the past, we didn't have the methyl mercury being tested or the inorganic arsenic being tested. We believe that in 6 months' time, the laboratory sector can come up with the ability to carry out the test. And in fact, quite a large number of laboratories can test the heavy metals for us. Some of them will also develop their capability in the light of the proposed amendments, so we don't need to worry. Now it is my turn. Basically, the Democratic Party is in support of the government's paper in relation to the proposals. We look forward to the early enactment of the amendments. This is because a lot of the heavy metals are harmful to our health. Of course, we are also mindful about food supply and food choices, but the overriding principle is that the food we consume should not jeopardize our health. Now, 2 questions from me. First of all, are we looking at the raw ingredients or the processed or the cooked versions? The administration has said that it will be the food in its raw form. I understand that there is a criticism saying that the administration hasn't done anything about the heavy metal contamination found in Chinese medicine. Whether you call it food or medicine, it is still something that we get into our stomach. So are you going to update the standards for Chinese herbal medicine as well? Now, for the DOH, it will look at the prepared Chinese medicine. They will look at the potions. Now, for food, you treat it differently. You won't look at the cooked product. But for Chinese medicine, you will look at the herbs or the Chinese medicine that has been prepared. How come that they are different? Dr. Ho. Well, for Chinese medicine, it is not within the remit of the Center for Food Safety, and the standards are also different. For us to have standards for the Chinese medicines, the requirements are different from that for food. So it's for the DOH. Are you going to work in parallel with the DOH? Because for chronic patients, they have to take such Chinese medicines on a long-term basis. You have different standards. But what about the health of the patients? How are you going to safeguard their health? I understand that the DOH is also concerned about this topic. They are also paying attention to the development of our consultation exercise. I believe that later on they would be responding to your inquiries. Can the DOH be asked to prepare a paper for us so that they will tell us what they will do concerning the heavy metals found in Chinese medicine? My second question is about rice, and in fact we have got a representative from the rice merchants. My question is, we have been using a very tight limit, is 0.1 mg for cadmium in rice. The government is going to relax the requirement. We don't quite support the idea. My question is, if we adhere to the threshold of 0.1 mg, which we have been using for over 30 years, are you going to encounter a problem with rice supply? Will you be running the risk of lacking in variety? Madam Lam, if we have the existing limit of 0.1 mg, it will be quite difficult for the rice merchants to source the supply. It will be more expensive, and for the places of origin, they will be very strict when it comes to the export of rice to us. But we've never had any problems with the supply of rice. There hasn't been any interruption. For the past 30 years, did we encounter any difficulties in getting rice that can meet the requirement of 0.1 mg? Dr. Ho, as I have said, since 2012, 450 samples have been taken, 4 unsatisfactory. So the satisfactory rate was 99%. In other words, it isn't that difficult to get rice that can adhere to the existing limit of 0.1 mg, right? Well, as far as supply is concerned, I don't think that there is a major impact. However, allow me to say this again. As a result of the requirements of the WTO, what we have been asking for will still be tighter than the Codex requirement. That is, instead of 0.4, it will be 0.2. Yes, I note this point, but it is a relaxation from the existing limit of 0.1 mg. The DP is against it. Dr. Chen, thank you, Madam Chair. For heavy metals, they are found in food, but at the same time, as you have seen it recently in the reports, there are people who are against vaccination. It is said that for the vaccines that we get, you will also encounter mercury, etc. For heavy metals, now today we talk about rice. You get mercury and cadmium in rice as well, and more mercury than cadmium. Now I come to my question. It wasn't raised by anyone last time. Now, the administration is going to amend the various MLs for heavy metals. I want to know whether it is a case of negative vetting or positive vetting for the changes to be introduced concerning the regulations. Can you answer this question first? Is it a case of amending the principal ordinance or? Yes, Madam Chair. Currently, For the Food Adulteration Metallic Contamination Regulations, it is a piece of subsidiary legislation. If we want to update it, please speak up. If we would like to add to the regulations, or if we want to update it, it is a matter of subsidiary legislation. So you are going to amend the subsidiary legislation, correct? Well, probably the existing concern is about the relaxation of the limit for cadmium. In Hong Kong, a lot of our rice is imported. So I come to my point, and that is if we find it difficult to source our rice, I want to know if the government can tell where we get our rice. Do you know the distribution of our source markets, and what about their own cadmium limits?
Is there a breakdown the source of origin for the rice? And Thailand is our biggest exporter. Dr. Chan, I would like to ask the administration, I'm looking at the paper, looking from the Trade Industry Department website, and the standards are adopting in line with the EU, Korea, mainland Singapore, in line and align with their 0.2 mg standards. Why I'm asking this question, actually, there's a reason for this. The rice coming into Hong Kong, not from EU, Korea, mainland, or Singapore. So that's why I'm asking, where do our rice come from? And it used to be Thailand in the past, and now Vietnam. We have more rice coming from them at a rapid pace. Let's say for what the standards of Thailand and Vietnam on cadmium. Do the government have such figures? Thank you for Dr. Chan's question. And from the trade data we have, in the past we noticed some changes. However, the most recent data have shown the rice supplies of Hong Kong mainly from Thailand and Vietnam. And from the mainland, it's take about 10% of the supply. And these three origins take up 90% of our total supply. And for the standards of these three countries, and Thailand have not set cadmium level for polished rice. And for Vietnam, had taken the Codex standard of 0.4, and the mainland that we mentioned have been using a stricter standard of 0.2. And our proposed standard is 0.2 as well. Okay, we still got time. And I heard, I think the question we raised are quite sensible. And because we have a proposed, as current state is quite strict. And for Vietnam and Thailand, and some of the rice of a higher coating point will be able to be exported to Hong Kong in the future. Mr. Chung, 5 minutes with question answers. I don't have much question to raise. However, I noticed that the Chinese medicine, if the chairman is somebody that would not reject this out of scope. I do not hope that Dr. Hope would ask for information from the Department of Health on how to regulate Chinese medicine. This is not should be not just in this panel. You should not do the work of Dr. Lee. We have some intrascope. We should not be wasting time debating this. You, as a chairman, and asking a government official that not part of this portfolio in using your time. Please be using. You should not be using our time to asking him to asking for different department to talk about Chinese medicine. This has nothing to do with us. You need to take I'm actually using my own time. Mr. Chung, please go back to your question. Whether it's Chinese medicine or food, to the public, this is all put edible. You should not be using my time to speak. What is food or Chinese medicine is considered to be ingested? You cannot claim that everything put in your mouth is food. Department of Health is responsible for Chinese medicine regulation. So these two departments are under Food and Health Bureau. So the FEHC have the right to convey to Department of Health. Dr. Chang, please continue your question. The DP could write to Department of Health. I hope that we'll not be talking over each other. And on the health, you can express it in the health service panel instead of wasting our time in discussing matters belonging to other panels. This is really not the question. And you should really respect this chamber. I hope that you should mostly focus your question instead of criticizing other members. You keep on being criticizing me how to be you criticizing me as my role as a chairman. Other panels, I don't need you to teach me how to be a chairman. So you like to ask a question? I'm talking to Mr. Ho. Would you like to continue, or it doesn't matter? We're using my 5 minutes because what time administration when talking to thin air. It's up to you whether to use your 5 minutes. Now that I'm asking, you're interrupting. So, Dr. Ho, I have some criticism about launching consultations during summer, and this amendment. This regulations have been updated in the past 2 or 3 decades. Where I don't see the urgency in that. So that I don't see why you need to go 3 months to have it done during summer recess. Thus, even though for the public inquiry, I'm not here to criticize the chairman, because as we go on holiday, and then that would be conclusion of the consultation. So how would the trade speak? So we don't have. However, I do not agree with the DP stance that we should legislate as soon as possible. So legislation should not be done in a hurry. This sort of amendments, whether even though it's claiming unsafe, it has been in practice for past few years. So it could really wait. As the most important, it could balance choices and public health. Thus, I hope you can listen carefully and think carefully. I won't speak much today because, frankly, I don't trust you. At the end, the amendment, the trade will not have strong opinions of it. I doubt the trade is fully represented here today, and we should wait until the exact legislation to come out to examine, to evaluate it. And the Liberal Party always held the stance that if you would adopt the Codex standards, we would not have an opinion on that. What we are afraid of that would selectively choose which one to follow or which one not to follow, and if we choose not to follow, we would look very closely. Why? My colleagues have mentioned that claimed that while childbearing, some food is bad for childbearing. Does that mean the women in countries wouldn't get pregnant? I think you should look into this carefully. I personally think that if it's China as a huge market would accept the standards and you follow suit, this is fine because you reduce your choices. You do not choose to follow suit first, and you try to go the other path that would affect choices to the public. I'm not talking about whether there will be more or less business, and hope that you can be more convincing in the future. How much food have you ingested in what amount that would affect to country instead of those 7 metals which I don't know how to pronounce. I remember Dr. York Chow talk about the malachite green. We agreed the legislation is bad for health, and now that if the malachite green is put into a fish pond, and why shouldn't that one person have to consume 298 kilograms in an infinite number of years to cause cancer? Does that require legislation? No one would consume 298 kilograms of a particular fish in that fish pond for infinite number of years. I hope that your arguments and your justification can be convincing. You cannot just rely on the votes and the support of the DP and the chairman rushing into hurry. Dr. Chow, I've given you allocate extra time. I hope that Mr. Ho, Dr. Ho, you respond to that. Thank you for Mr. Cheng's question. So let me just talk about the childbearing women. We know Hong Kong is famous for its huge consumption of fish. So it's saying that why are we having a particular problem? Eating fish is the main source of ingesting methyl mercury. So if we eat more fish, such problem would arise. And eating fish for pregnant women is rather important because there are a lot of nutrients such as omega-3 and so on, other substance which is good for a fetus development. Chairman, I'm not asking about the fish and pregnant women. You mentioned that. I'm asking that why the consultation periods and so on. I hope that they could be convincing. Now, trying to convince my colleagues. You've spoken enough. Let Dr. Ho finish because other members have asked this question. Does that mean so the different dietary habits in Hong Kong and overseas? I hope encouraged pregnant women to eat more fish during pregnancy. However, they have to be very selective. For example, less predatory fish. And our proposal of not relaxing standards on predatory fish it is exactly to target this issue. Anyone who haven't spoke on the first round of questioning and who to speak now? Two more. Mr. Leong and Dr. Cheung. Any more members which to speak from the first round? If not, we shall cut off. So we have Mr. Leong and Dr. Cheung. We have 3 minutes each. Mr. Leong, this is matter is quite simple. Does the society have a consensus? Because on the amendment, on the regulations, and our colleagues have two concerns. First of all, that we hope that if the amendment shall go ahead, I hope that they will using as stricter standards because you can't amend the regulations frequently. I hope that the administration can answer our members, just like Dr. Chen mentioned, that the Thailand have a different standard than Hong Kong. So the Hong Kong is not required to uphold their standard because they're just exporting the rice. So after the rice have been imported, then we actually have to intercept the rice that doesn't meet our standards. That would create a problem that of a he said, she said problem of intercepting non-compliant rice. I would like to ask you, have you considered that would the suppliers be aware of the new amendments? With our strategy that would just intercept the rice so you can't sell them, and that would lead to two consequences. One would be the rice merchants would claim that so what are they going to do? Maybe that would incur losses. And the second consequence is that if the rice have been intercepted, if Thailand is being the main supplier of our rice, so that means there will be a deep supply shortfall. So during the consultation, we have to come up with a well-rounded solution. This chamber, I think that we spend so much resources on the Center for Food Safety that we have to guarantee the food safety to the utmost. And for the proposed members, how do we find a balance that is acceptable to all? And the mode of implementation, what I'm interested in is the later. Because once the implementation, what the amendments improved to help be implemented, and hope that the implementation will help it to be comprehensive. We also consult other stakeholders besides LegCo, because there will be huge ramifications. The administration think that what is right should be done, which be upon. I'm not only be speaking for the rice merchant, others speaking of the rice eaters. You should actually contact the Thailand because on the proposed changes, or maybe locate for a particular 2 brands that would meet our new criteria. However, we should not sacrifice our standards to satisfy Thailand. And Thailand, you know that they're proposed with the relaxation of the cadmium levels from 0.1 to 0.2. Yes, I understand. There'll be more rice that not even existing compliant that we're able to import it into Hong Kong. And most of the LegCo members think that we should contact the Thailand authorities or the suppliers that we shall update the standards. So maybe I should have an amendment on top of the amendments.
Administration, do you have the statistics concerning the rice supply? Well, in relation to this issue, we have already notified the World Trade Organization. All the member states are aware of the substance of our proposed amendments. During consultation period, if they want to comment on it, they can tell us. In other words, the administration should anticipate amendments to be proposed by our members concerning the cadmium limit in rice. Next, Dr. Fernando Zhang. I took an overall view of your proposals. I think it should be welcome because for the 7 metallic contaminants under the Food Adulteration regulations, we are going to be aligned with the Codex requirements. However, the chair lady just now referred to the case of rice. It is said that the proposal is to relax the requirement to 0.2 mg. I'm concerned because it means that we are out of step with the international standards. Hong Kong isn't a large market. However, if other countries have already enhanced the standards and we haven't had any change or much change since 1983, and if more and more countries are adopting a higher limit, then it means that will become the dumping ground of non-compliant food items. I'm worried. Well, you may very well say that we are going to have more choices, but then we are getting more bad choices, and then we are getting more varieties. However, they are going to contain more metals. We don't want our health to be jeopardized, in particular the health of our pregnant women, because their fetal health will be affected. Can the administration explain this point? Don't you think that we should have defended our tighter limit? Dr. Ho. Thank you, Dr. Zhang, for your question. We have earlier on explained For our proposed limit for polished rice, there are a few points here. First of all, arsenic, lead, mercury, and cadmium will have their limits provided for. When compared with the existing limits, we are only going to relax the limit for cadmium. For the others, we're going to tighten up the limits. When compared with Codex requirements, basically, we are either adopting the Codex limits or we are more stringent than the Codex limit. So we won't have the risk of getting Hong Kong to become a dumping ground. Is there scientific evidence to show that maintaining the cadmium limit at 0.2 mg will not pose any health risk? Dr. Hall, we have also explained. We did carry out a study, and it was called a total diet study. In other words, we try to look at the exposure to cadmium in our diets. For the general population, the exposure is lower than that laid down by the Codex. So exposure to cadmium via diet would not pose a problem to us. In the past few years, we have been monitoring the cadmium content in rice. The satisfaction rate has been 99%. 64% of the cadmium level in rice is lower than the detectable level. The cadmium is lower than 0.02. So the cadmium level is quite good. I want to know if anybody would like to ask a question in the first round. If not, I want to ask a question again as the second round. For cadmium, if we look at the information in the tables in the consultation document, in fact, we are going to relax the limit by 100%, and it's not just polished rice but also husked rice, and then for leafy vegetables also from 0.1 to 0.2 mg. As we have already said, for the DP, cadmium is also carcinogenic. It hasn't got any merits for us, so we are against any relaxation. Can I ask Ms. Lam, for the past 20-30 years, as far as import of rice is concerned, for you to meet the 0.1 mg requirement, have you ever encountered any difficulties? So far, we haven't. But of course, you would know that over the span of 30 years, the environment, the pollution, the soil, etc., would have been affected. In the future, we may see some changes, and we are afraid that we may have fewer choices if we still cling on to the 0.1 mg limit. For the trade to source our rice, probably we need to try harder, and we need to carry out more tests, and the supply would be tight. Have you been importing rice from mainland China? My understanding is that other than one type of rice, we seldom get rice from mainland China. Is it because they are not able to meet the 0.1 mg requirement? Correct. Because for the rice in the southern areas, they can just make it. Sometimes they are lower than 0.1, but it is quite difficult. So other than pearl rice, we don't get rice from mainland. it's more common to see it's not easy to get compliant rice. So if the cadmium limit is relaxed to 0.2 mg, does it mean that it's easier for you to get rice from the southern part of China meeting the 0.2 mg requirement? Not necessarily. We need to find the proper sources. We want to get rice grown in areas far away from pollution, and it's below 0.1 or slightly higher than 0.1 mg. But even the soil in the southern part of China, maybe they are also contaminated. Well, there is rice still not yet polluted in the southern part of China, as long as they haven't been urbanized. We're still getting clean soil. But then we need to go around to search for it. So even if we relax it to 0.2 mg, there won't be too many impacts, because the rice in the southern part of China is more than 0.2 mg. No, there is a supply below 0.1 mg, but the quantity is not huge. We need to go around to look for it. The majority of our rice comes from Thailand, right? Yes, mainly from Thailand. Also from Vietnam. What about the relaxation of the cadmium limit for vegetables as well? Dr. Ho. It is also based on the 3 points that I've made: protection of public health, second, alignment with international requirements, and thirdly, enhancing the enforcement effectiveness. For cadmium limit for vegetables, we're still in line with the international requirements. We have carried out a risk assessment. It will still be good for or adequate for public health. I think you are being self-contradictory. You want to safeguard public health, and yet you are relaxing the cadmium limit. As I have said, there are 3 objectives. For our limits, if the limit is tighter, more stringent than that of the Codex, it has to be justified as to why we want to tighten it. For leafy vegetables, even if we are to relax it to 0.2, it will still be adequate to protect public health. Therefore, we lack evidence or arguments to say that we should keep our existing limit. Alright, let me ask a question again, and that's about lead. We have lead in water, and in fact lead is also found in food. We are worried whether there is any exceedance. Now, for certain food items, the administration would like to make it more stringent, like fruits. And for some vegetables, again, there will be a tightening up. Instead of 6, it will be 0.1 or 0.05. But then for tea and dried chrysanthemum, you are just making a slight change. Instead of 6, it will be 5 mg. So when compared with the drastic change to be carried out to fruits and vegetables, it is not the same. For dried chrysanthemum, it will be down to 5 mg instead of 6. Why not the same as fruits and vegetables? Well, currently the limits for lead are more relaxed and out of step with the international requirements. Therefore, on this occasion, we have adopted wholesale the Codex limits. But then for certain food items, they are of particular concern to us, and yet the Codex hasn't got any ML for them. Say, for example, the few items you referred to, tea leaves, dried chrysanthemum, as well as leaves of the Chinese holly. We haven't got any Codex limits for them. So for us to decide how to come up with the right limit, we have been making rough we have been making reference to the limits in our trading partners, and mainly speaking, the limits or the levels in the mainland. Why just make reference to the mainland Chinese limits? What about other countries? What about the limits or the standards in Singapore, Taiwan, Japan, say for example for tea leaves? Madam Chair, I'm afraid I have to give you the information afterwards. Yes, please, in writing. And then mercury for fish. Mr. Chu from the DP mentioned this point. For fish, you talk about the methyl mercury, and it will be 0.5 mg, but you don't talk about total mercury for fish. Why not? Second question is for aquatic animals. Other than fish, you don't have the methyl mercury limit. You've only got that for total mercury. Why can't you target at both fish and aquatic animals as well? Thank you, Chair. When we drop our requirements, we mainly make reference to the Codex limits. So, in other words, if the Codex has a limit on methyl mercury, we do so. If it is just for total mercury, again we follow suit. For aquatic animals, I think they have also got the methyl mercury. It depends on what the Codex has got. My question is, do they define the ml for methyl mercury for aquatic animals? If that is the case, why you have it for total mercury only? Of course, we have got both total mercury as well as methyl mercury in different food items. Unless we are fully justified, we have to follow the Codex. I just do not see that you are justified. You haven't answered my question. Let me turn it the other way round. For fish, you are imposing a limit on methyl mercury. I think it is very toxic. It is going to affect the brain of the fetus. And what about mercury in other forms? It is still toxic to human health. Is that right? And what is the health impact?
And on mercury, they would come in different forms. There could be methyl mercury, which is the most toxic, and they do affect infant and fetus brain development, and metallic mercury. Let's say it could happen a lot when filling the tooth. It could relatively low toxicity. There's no problem if ingest a very small amount. And for inorganic mercury, have their own toxicity, but however, is not low toxicity compared to methyl mercury. So when we're drafting the standards, we'll make reference with the Codex standards, because Codex would go through a process. In the past, it was using total mercury levels, and back then the testing of methyl mercury would require high sophistication, but recent development has shown that the methyl mercury would be of the most concern. So the latest standard would use methyl standards. However, the old standard would using total mercury. Any questions from today's deputations to the administration, or anyone a deputation to think the questions have been answered? Chairman, I'm Dr. Ho. I'd like to, asking on vegetables. A lot of reports are showing that there'll be low metallic contaminants in the press, and so why would you enhance the standards for vegetables? They're actually relaxing. Thanks for Dr. Wang's question on vegetables. Most of the standards have been tightened. The reason for that, that we have standards had to be updated that were not aligned with international standards. So in this amendment, we would on wholesale adoption of Codex standards. in German, because not all vegetables would carry metallic contaminants. Besides some spinach that would, and others who would absorb metallic contaminants easily. For example, lettuce would not intake metallic contaminants. Would you differentiate between different vegetable types? We classify into different type of vegetables and have their own maximum levels, and some of them would be more general, some of them would be more detailed. And on the mainland vegetables, I would like to ask Dr. Ho, do they comply with the requirements? They have a very high pass rate. What we're most concerned about is cadmium emissions, because we're currently having a more stringent standard codex. Thus, we suggested to align with the next step, which show our standard for them uniform. Because over 90% of vegetables are from mainland, and we visited the factories in mainland that would have processed the vegetables with oxygen peroxide and done through vacuum treatment to transport them to the fast food restaurants. And if the fruits and vegetables of China are fine, does that mean we have to further relax them or what? And there's actually no relation between their packaging and their metallic contaminants content. It had to do with the irrigation water or the land contamination. That probably not much to do with the packaging. I think the CFS have done a lot of testing vegetables, and the DP have done testing themselves. Some of them exceed the limit, and some don't, and most usually as the lead and cadmium. So if the cadmium limits are relaxed, the DP would object to that. As we all know, some of the farmland mainland are polluted, and rather rice or vegetables, especially in the south, we're quite concerned. And if there's no impact to our food supply, the Democratic Party would not object relaxing the standards. It should actually be tightened. So any other deputations or members would like to speak? One more. Mr. Ling. And in terms of quarantine and inspection, how does the administration ensure that the wastage at a manageable levels, and some of them seafood might not able to withstand the testing time? You talk about live seafood or ice seafood. Live seafood, because they require that would create a lot of damage during testing process. What is the situation on live imported seafood? And current regulations, and we have the metallic contaminants levels already under regulations. We usually took by random sampling, and then extract a sample, and the seafood are let go. If any problems, we would recall it and so on. So there's minimum impacted trade. So the testing done by the trade themselves and provide the health certification, or the administration would conduct testing to see that the fishes or seafood would meet the standards. Currently, there's no import requirements of mandatory metallic contaminants testing, so they would not. So they would import something they would not know that would exceed the limit. So they would need to know whether the country origin would be contaminated or have other conditions. Let's say on the mercury situation, and the predatory fishes is quite often to exceed the permitted levels. So what's the proportion of predatory seafood imported into Hong Kong? Besides, and mostly expensive fishes are seafood, fishes or lobster actually imported into Hong Kong, and they usually need to pass through random testing doing at the customs, and the time for testing we could take too long. That would lead to wastage. The trade would actually provide health certification, and would the administration accept that and allow the seafood to enter the market instead of that would reduce the damage, the wastage caused by inspection. There was actually testing done by CFS instead of the custom, right? And we would conduct a random sampling testing in future. If the health certification is provided, maybe that would be discussed during the consultation exercise. So right now, we need to look at the health certification, and some of the food items have certification. However, they're not ordinary seafood items, like say oysters, lobster, and so on. So they would be caught by the fishermen themselves. Of course, they could not provide the health certificates. They need to take them to testing to prove that they are within the levels before putting them out to the market. And for anyone who would like to sell food, they would take action to ensure that the food we had to meet the standard hygienic and sanitary requirements. And different members of trade will adopt different measures. Let's say for the rice import arrangement, so the importer have imported some rice from southern China or Thailand. So do they need to show that the metallic contaminants are within the perimeter levels? Currently, there is no such requirement. So after they be imported, you would test them by random sampling. So why not enforce that when they arrive in Hong Kong? We actually targeted high-risk food items such as meat or oysters. We feel they're of higher risk, thus we do have requirements or administrative arrangements in place. And for other food items of lower risk, we do not have such requirements. On rice, the pass rate on cadmium is at 99%, and we feel that it is of a minus risk, so we not have a specific demands on it. We actually, the meeting supposed to finish at 12:45. I see Mr. Tam raise their hand, so we should extend for 5 minutes to let Mr. Tam ask the question. I'm sorry, I'm actually chairing another meeting next door. I'm asking a question. Said before, launching a new regulations. Have we actually tested on the markets? So have we actually conduct market testing that how many of the existing food categories would fail under the new regulation regime? Do you have some figures you can provide? And we're drafting such standards. We have conducted quite a few studies. We took at the past surveillance figures. This regulation will be enforced for a few decades, so we have accumulated a lot of data. We also will conduct a lot of baseline study, and to see if what is the impact of the new standards on Hong Kong's food supply, on how many of them would fit the new criteria. And we'll also make reference to Codex principle of as low as reasonably possible in helping the standards that will be strict but will not have major impact on the food supply. And after we collect the figures, we conduct risk assessment. Conducted the proposed standards would provide sufficient protection for public health. Chairman, I just seem to be asking a question. My question was quite precise. So you've been adopting the Codex standards, and you have the a set of new levels. In the past, have you rendered to test them that if the new regime is adopted, what's the number of food items that would not meet the new requirement. Is that what I mean? So you've been conducted random testing. But most of the standard will be tightened up. So you have all the data that have been already collected. So if this new standard were to be adopted, if we are using the standards on the old current samples, would it happen that a huge number of food items would exceed the future levels? So or maybe all the food tests we've done in the past that we showed that they will meet the future regulatory entry so that it will not have any disrupt our food supplies. Dr. Howard actually explained that it would affect 5% of our food supplies, at which so maybe Dr. could explain that again. I have actually replied to Dr. Tam. First of all, would rely on the surveillance data in the past, and that would depend on the testing levels. Because after that, we've tightened material, so we may not have such data available. So we have a baseline study into establishing a standard, and we detect the samples of the market to see their pass rate. And we setting the standards. We are adopting the ALARA principle. This is the recommended practice from Codex to ensure that the failure rate would not exceed 5%. That for each food group, our standard we set, it should not lead to over 5% of failure. I hope to strike a balance that proposed limits that is stringent, yet would not cause a major disruption to our food supply. Never mind. The chairman has to answer my question. Dr. Ho would able to provide specific information and data that would provide to members after the meeting. And the meeting is coming to an end. I hope to remind members that on July 17 in the afternoon, we should have a routine meeting of the Food Hygiene Environment Panel. We hope to thank the deputations, administration representatives for attending. If not, and for no any other business, the meeting is now adjourned.